This is very funny now because we have Yemen teaching the Israelis, giving them a taste of their own medicine. You want to blockade Gaza? We'll blockade you. And not just you, we're going to blockade all your friends. Screw you. Screw all of you. None of you are coming through here. This is our land. We will fire on you till you learn your goddamn lesson. You want to keep starving Palestinians? You want to deprive them of medicine? You want to kill them? Okay, we're going to make sure you pay for it, and you pay very, very dearly. We're going to teach you a goddamn lesson you will never forget. The Yemen have so many problems they haven't even recovered from, and nevertheless, they take the time and they make the effort to stand up for the Palestinians, which really says something, because these Arab countries around them, surrounding Yemen, that are neighboring Yemen, they don't have these problems. They are very rich. They are very wealthy, and they could easily do what Yemen is doing times 10 even, but there's no will to do it from the leadership because they are stooges. This is the sad fact.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Abarca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes wherever you find this episode. You can also find our personal social media handles mine at Don Eduardo Abarca on Instagram. And please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. Thank you. All right, so today's topic will be discussing the Houthis at the Red Sea and the relationship to Palestine. Did any of you want to say any further comment to the topic?
No, just that I kept on saying to you, Kenny, you and Eduardo, I want to talk about the Houthis in the Red Sea. And I just want to tell our audience, we're not experts, but I wanted to use this episode as a chance to kind of learn a little bit more about this group, about Yemen, about what's going on in the Red Sea. And so hopefully most of what we say is right. If people feel differently or think differently, let us know.
Right.
And then, of course, it's also just talking about a regional group that's challenging the U.S. empire, and what's going on there, because I think that's very important, and it's in response to what's going on in it, what Israel's doing to Gaza and the Palestinians.
Yeah,
just want to add that we kind of mentioned the Houthis when the Israeli bombardment started post October 7th, but I didn't make much of it, honestly. I thought it was more of a symbolic gesture to declare, their support because I think they declared war right at the beginning against Israel.
Yeah.
I didn't make much of it. I thought it was just like a publicity stunt, but obviously there is a lot more to that now. And it's very important, I think, to make sense of it. And just like you, I'm not an expert. This was a learning experience of piecing together other things that I knew that have happened, because I think we're going to find ourselves digging back, and kind of maybe even an overview of certain, issues of, that might shed some light onto this and try to make sense of, where this may head.
Okay. So, Annie, you decided to revisit this conflict, but with the perspective on the Houthis at the Red Sea. Why did you think it was important?
Well, like Kenny, I remember hearing, and I've forgotten, so that either a military commander of the Houthis had come forward and had declared war on Israel as a result of their attack on Gaza when they went into Gaza, and that was early November, or rather, maybe that was even earlier than that. But throughout, starting in early November, they have been launching drone attacks, various and aerial attacks where they board where they board ships and take them over, basically really harassing ships coming through the Strait of, or Bab al-Mandeb Strait. which I think we should probably go over some of these regions on a map, and have made it so that a major shipping area through the Red Sea, in and out, and predominantly in the ones going to Israel, has been restricted, and they've now cut off like 30% of the flow of goods into that region, and it has really proven a problem for the United States. And I've been surprised at how much it's kind of put the U.S. on a back foot. The U.S. is bringing ships into the Red Sea. They have 2 carrier groups there and destroyers as well that all follow along with it. But the U.S. has been like, we're going to get you, we're going to get you. And then they even said it today. They said, look, this is our, we're warning you again. And they got some of the other countries that are in the UN to, go with their warning, particularly their Western allies. And the Houthis immediately, pretty much hours later, responded with sending the first, what was called a surface vehicle, unmanned surface vehicle, which is basically an unmanned boat, which is being sent towards another ship, and then it blows up. Now, this thing never did any damage. It blew up far away from any target, but it shows a lot of defiance by a group that I did not know was this military. Like, I know about Hezbollah, I know about Hamas. I did not know about this Houthi group as a potential military problem for U.S. proxies in the region. And so it was really surprising to me, and so I wanted to talk about it. And of course, it also, to me, indicates prospects and the fact that this, in my opinion, is a growing war. It's bringing in more actors, and I think that's always troubling. But I think we have to. I want to talk about it, and I want to say what I think it means.
Just to add that, this boat that you mentioned, like, what I understand is that the Houthis have been focused on Israel-bound ships, right?
Yeah.
And the most recent attack that you mentioned was a boat that was heading towards a U.S. Ship, and then it blew up before it made contact. But again, that deviates a little bit because they've been focusing on Israel-bound stuff. They haven't, so it is like an escalation of defiance against the U.S., who is trying to make a coalition of nations to address this issue on a very important shipping lane that brings not only goods to Israel, but also to, like you said, through the Suez Canal to Europe. And it's a big part of the global economy. And so in the Houthis, they're not, the Yemen itself is the poorest country in the region, I believe. And until recently, they were engaged in conflict with Saudi Arabia. They were blockaded, and there was a massive humanitarian situation there because the Saudis, along with U.S. support, in intelligence, weapons, and all this, had blockaded Yemen, and the Houthis, being one of the most important groups in the country militarily, were able to fight back the Saudis, and because I think that's something that is not very spoken, that in fact, it's people who say that the Houthis were able to defeat Saudi Arabia because they pushed them back, and they started using some of the technology that they're using right now, drones, because there is a disproportionate relationship here in terms of technology and weapons, right? Like the U.S. is touting its carriers and ships, and the Houthis have been able to do this, which in effect is an embargo on Israel, with a lot less technology, a lot less resources, and they are facing a massive problem. I don't know if you want to add anything or.
I mean, just that to talk about what's happening today takes us back to talking about Yemen. And we know that the U.S. has been involved with Saudi Arabia in fighting a civil war and taking sides on that civil war in Yemen. And Saudi Arabia was backing the so-called the government that was recognized. But the Houthis are part of one of the most powerful sections of factions within Yemen who have not been happy, who are not happy with the corruption in the government, who are not happy with the fact that the government is so connected to Saudi Arabia and so connected to the West, and so connected to Israel. And so there's been opposition. And so this civil war that you've been hearing about in Yemen the Houthis have played a prominent role in fighting on one side of that, and of course people are talking about Iran as helping supply the Houthis, and so it's proxies on all sides as it's being discussed. The Saudi Arabia being a proxy for the United States, but also supporting the government there, and the Houthis and others fighting against the corruption of that government, and Iran apparently helping arm them. Now, mind you, recently there was an agreement reached between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and many people had hoped and believed that it would lead to the end of the civil war in Yemen. I don't know if that's the case, but it's been interesting to me that this event, that the Houthis should be so aggressive in the face of that agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that, to me, as far as I can tell, Saudi Arabia has been fairly silent about this and has not spoken against it. So I feel like that agreement that was reached between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which that agreement was helped by China, I do feel figures into what the Houthis are doing right now, because I feel like space has been open for the Houthis to act, and I personally do believe Iran is also a player in this game.
I mean, the other thing too is that the Houthi rebels model themselves on the Shia armed group in Lebanon. So there's also a thought that they're backed with weapons and training by Hezbollah. Has been providing them with military expertise and training since 2014. And yeah, I don't know if that negotiation between Iran and Saudi Arabia that has lessened or discreetly made them secretly support the Houthis. That's also a question I had in mind when you brought that up, Andy. And even though Iran has come out and denied that they have any involvement in the attacks at the Red Sea, the Houthis don't deny it at all. And there's drone footage. If anyone wants to see it, maybe we might include it here. That you can just go on YouTube and look at it, where where you can see the Houthis hijacking one of the vessel ships. So I think it was a European vessel, but managed by Japanese. I think it was they were the ones maneuvering the vessel, but I'm not too sure on that one. Anyhow, and they're not denying anything about it. They're very proudly out saying it, that they are the ones hijacking these vessels or throwing these missiles, which haven't caused damage because Israel did their own airstrike, and they placed the Palestinian flag and the Yemeni flag on the vessel that they hijacked. People can go look at that. I will provide it here.
Yeah, and I think they brought the vessel into a Yemen port, and they have the crew there. They're held hostage, and so this is one of the things that the U.S. is saying. It's like, we want that ship released. We want you to stop your terror on the seas, and that was a statement that the U.S. has made in conjunction with its normal allies of the France and Britain and Japan. There's a few others. The interesting thing is though, when the U.S. was trying to mobilize ships into that region under what's called Operation Prosperity Guardian, the only country that I think has delivered any ships is Britain. Like other countries, yeah, we'll sign on or hesitated even, but if they sent anything, all they sent were some people. They weren't sending ships. And again, I think this is where I feel like the U.S. challenging the Houthis in that region, which I think their understanding is taking on the Houthis means taking on Iran. I think Europe knows that this is going to lead to a conflict with Iran, and they don't want to be drawn into it. That's my opinion of why they're so reluctant to support the U.S. militarily, because even when Lloyd Austin proposed Operation Prosperity Guardian, he pretty much straight out said that this is a movement. This is not just a move against the Houthis. This is really a challenge against Iran's backing of terror groups. And we're going to take on Iran. And there are people in the U.S. government who feel like the U.S. is wasting its time fighting the Houthis and should go straight for Iran and attack them.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to mention that at least that I understand that Saudi Arabia is not part of this coalition to try to, control this damage or this threat of the Yemeni. And one argument that I've heard in different channels, is that it goes back to the Houthis beating back the Saudis in that conflict, because the Saudis had an embargo, but then the Houthis started attacking through drones some of their oil infrastructure, which is a sign of their wealth, and and so that's one reason that Saudi Arabia might hesitate to join this exercise in policing that area. And the other thing that Garland Nixon makes this argument that why the hesitation of like other European countries, even the US, in actually doing something significant like invading Yemen, which obviously takes, or bombing Yemen. This is the limiting the escalation of this issue, because he talks about insurance for these ships that have to go through this passage. And so Garland Nixon argues that insurance companies don't pay out during war time, and so if there is war declared there, the shipping companies are not going to want to take a risk and go through there. They're going to have to go around the Horn of Africa, and the cost of that is immense. And so any escalation, of war affects commerce, through that region. And to me, it makes sense because the Houthis are leveraging, in being very bold, for a country that you'll get destroyed, if the U.S. and Western allies were to just bomb the shit out of it. But obviously, that would signify that there's an escalation and a profound effect on the commerce in the world economy. And I think this is maybe the point where we talk about the geography of the area. I don't know if you think that's a good idea.
You want me to do a little background then on that?
Please.
Yeah. I mean, I'll also just say that it seems to me that as Saudi Arabia moves closer to China, gets more closer to things, the institutions like BRICS, I feel like Saudi Arabia's actions here are more a result of silence in relationship to, they're less taking U.S. sides in all these Middle Eastern affairs, as they did in the last decade. So I feel like, to me, it's not, to me, what Saudi Arabia is doing is not less about how they're concerned about the Houthis and more that they're increasingly politically aligning themselves with the unaligned nations, and then with the other pole that's building around China and Russia. That's my opinion. But let's take a look at just so at least let people can know what we're talking about in terms of the region, because this was confusing for me and confusing for Brandy. So we should. So people often hear about the Persian Gulf. That's the region over here. And again, I'm sorry for people who are just listening, but it's this is what we're doing. And that's what abuts Iran, and it's between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And you've heard a lot about the Strait of Hormuz, and that is the region right here, which goes from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman out here. And this is where that the Strait of Hormuz was where that drone was shot down by Iran, and that U.S. was getting really pissed about that. But the region that we're looking at is all the way out in the Arabian Sea, back here, the Gulf of Aden. But the region we're looking at is down here with Yemen, which is called Bab el Mandeb Strait. And this is the region that is being attacked by the Houthis with drones and with helicopters coming in and seizing ships. That's right here. And that leads into the Red Sea, which is right here. And the Red Sea then leads to the Suez Canal right up here. I guess this is the Suez, and this is the Suez Canal up here, which is a very important feature for shipping. And again, one of the claims that has been made is that actually, and I heard this by Richard Medhurst, that Israel, after Palestine and Gaza in particular, was doing that to build its own canal through Israel, through Palestine, into the Red Sea, so it wouldn't have to rely on the Suez Canal. So that's part one, and that, of course, that leads out to the Mediterranean Sea out here. And the other thing I wanted to show is just a map of Yemen. And this is Yemen. Right here is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And then the capital is Sana'a. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but the region that the Houthis are coming out of is, I often hear it as Sada, is over here up in northern Yemen, which abuts Saudi Arabia. And they have pretty much control of this region, military control and governmental control. And a lot of the civil war and the political struggles were fought in the capital, in which, I think actually a former president was killed there. So I think that's mostly it. The other thing I wanted to say is that the U.S. is broken up into various command structures, and this region is called the U.S. CENTCOM. And this is basically, the U.S. is an empire, so it's broken the globe up into various command centers around the globe, and the region we're looking at is the U.S. CENTCOM, which is literally this whole area I've been talking about. So I just wanted to say that.
I just wanted to add that, again, emphasize, like, that is a massive shipping lane, that goes through that region. And so that the Strait of how do you pronounce it?
Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Yeah, it's super important. It's a choke point for a big part of the global economy. Stuff coming from China, from India, from Southeast Asia. Basically the factory of the world, right? Coming through that to places like Europe, and and even the stuff coming, the oil, I imagine, coming from the Persian Gulf has to go around there through that region, right, to Europe.
To get to it cheaply, like, let's zoom out here, because what you're saying is that if you don't go through here, then what you got to do is you have to skip all this whole strait, this Bab el-Mandeb Strait. You've got to go all the way. Let me get rid of this. You've got to go all the way around the Horn of Africa here, and then all the way around here and come into Europe that way. So that's way more distance, a lot more expensive, and that's what the Houthis are counting on here.
It might be useful to also to explain that Africa is always misrepresented, so it's way more massive than it is on this map. So it is a massive distance that they would have to cover, and the cost of things, just skyrocket for a minute, And I think that it's interesting to me that if that strait was to be shut off, one of the regions that would be firstly affected would be Europe, right? In the context of having blown the pipeline between Germany and Russia, that supplied cheap gas, right, to Europe, and this affected a lot of European countries, especially Germany, and during winter time, a potential conflict or an increase, or disruption, further disruption of that shipping lanes puts Europe in a bigger, and I think that there's something there to think about, because Europe has been messed with. The U.S. kind of blew up a pipeline, right? And that gave them cheap oil, and so they're willing to put them on the line. And
that's a good point. That's another reason why Europe might not be jumping on Operation Prosperity Guardian. They don't want to be known as really militarily siding with this, where the Houthis and potentially Iran can take even more aggressive steps to shut down oil that's going to them. That's a really good point, because that may be another reason. I thought about it was just like Europe's reluctance to join, because since I saw this action as U.S. ultimately trying to push towards a war with Iran, I saw it as the Europe trying to put the brakes on that. But I could also see it as very much like, oh my gosh, we've already gotten one oil source cut down, and it's hurt our industry. Now, if we get really involved in this, yes, the war escalates, and we're on the hook for taking sides on this thing, and that could be very economically damaging. So that's a good point.
And it's sorry to, this is my last point about this. I agree with the statement you made earlier that Saudi Arabia might be watching, and be reluctant to participate. Is not only the Houthis. I do think that's part of it, but Saudi Arabia is like playing their game, like to playing their cards for the winner over here. They're and so they have a half-ass commitment to the U.S., but they're also watching on the other side, right? Like they were weren't they considering the no longer accepting dollars as the only currency for petroleum exchange in the global market?
Yeah.
And that might have some effect on the U.S. currency, but I think all those things are in play. Like Saudi Arabia is watching, and to see what happens, and like any smart country, just putting chips everywhere, to see what happens in this conflict.
Saudi Arabia has more in common with Palestinians than they do with Israel, but it's all going to be more of a political game of which power they wish to align themselves with. I kind of thought, what would the Muslim countries surrounding Israel would do with the attack on Gaza? And the only ones I feel really showed up was Lebanon, and I'm just talking about the region and the most powerful countries around there. That's what comes to mind for me. And yeah, that's what I was going to say about that, Saudi Arabia.
And I would agree with that. I would say the Houthis have kind of embarrassed the other, except for maybe Hezbollah, which has played a little bit more of a role. All the other countries have just been talk, like Erdogan in Turkey and the president of Jordan. All of them have made statements about how bad this is. But one of the things that Richard Medhurst said, Egypt is really upset about what's happening there and won't take the Palestinians in. But he's like, well, why don't they shut down the Suez Canal? It's their canal. They could shut it down, or at least shut it down to Israeli goods. And they don't do it. And he goes to the Houthis, which are obviously much less powerful and much less known, have taken more steps to do something here than the government of Egypt. So I think it's been,
even as they're trying to engage in their own war against Saudi Arabia. It's trying to manage the civil war that's happening in their own country.
Yeah, but
and
the only thing is, I don't know how active that civil war is right now.
Right.
I
mean, even just that, and then showing the support for Palestine is what I'm trying to say. It's just how active it is or isn't. They are showing true solidarity in their stance. Go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
I personally have my questions about solidarity because a lot of these countries, like fellow Muslim countries, have like forsaken Palestine. Until Hamas did this action that kind of forced the hand. And the question that I have, maybe for the two of you, I'm trying to answer. Like, what do the Houthis get out of this? Right? Like, because I don't see the world working on like, oh, we were going to go to fight and put or a whole population at risk for solidarity. I don't think that's how the world works. And so, and the thing that we keep talking about is that the world is changing. The U.S. is on its heels. Europe, obviously, it's a satellite state, I would say, of the U.S. at this point. They have no teeth. NATO has been humiliated in a way, and they've shown that they don't have the industrial capacity, right, to engage in a potential, industrial scale war. We've talked about this in the past. And so why would a country that doesn't have nearly the resources of, many others, and truly, I do think they have links to Iran, and the Iranians themselves have a strategy there because now they have a choke point. Iran can themselves, choke the Strait of Hormuz, right? Like, and all that oil coming to the rest, of the world and just create damage there. And then now you have the other, strait that takes stuff to Europe. It's not just about oil; it's about products being produced in other countries too. And so, why would the Houthis now? And I think this it shows that the world has changed. That multipolar world, or at least like the hegemony of the U.S. is being broken, in the sense that let's call it a ragtag, just for effect, group of military with cheap technology is creating this havoc. They're not invading anybody. Yemen is not invading anybody. They're taking over some ships and disrupting, and creating an embargo on. So why now? And I listen to people like what's his name, Scott Ritter. So he keeps talking about the shortfall in recruiting of the U.S. The U.S. doesn't have the bodies to go and invade any countries. In any countries that is not Iraq or Afghanistan. They don't have the resources. The technology that the U.S. is occupying, he talks about, is almost obsolete now, because as we've seen in Ukraine, drone technology is here to stay, and the U.S. is not the master of it. The U.S. hasn't had to employ this technology in real conflict, and they're still trying to figure out how to defend stuff. Because one thing that I found out was that the Houthis, during the conflict with the Saudi Arabians, who happened to have the same Patriot missiles or whatever, I think the ones that are supposed to defend right from attacks that Israel had, that the Hamas was able to attack and undermine. So Saudi Arabia has the same technology, and the Houthis were also able to undermine their technology in order to do some damage to some of their infrastructure, and to bring them to the table to talk, to say, hey, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should talk. Because they had it in a significant embargo around Yemen, and the Houthis with their inferior, we think it's inferior, right? Like, because we often talk about aircraft carriers and intercontinental missiles and all this crap, but the Houthis are doing it with drones that are way cheaper than every missile that Israel is dropping on Hamas, or not Hamas, the Palestinian civilians. And so again, the world has changed, and that's why I find that argument very persuasive, because again, here we have the Houthis creating havoc and a big headache for the U.S. and its allies at the moment.
I mean, I think your question doesn't have an answer that we can look at. I mean, if the question is, what do the Houthis get out of this? I think our speculation here, well, my speculate is that Yemen is mostly supported by the Houthis. Like the Yemeni people support the Houthis. They are under the control of most of the way that the Houthis govern northern Yemen, most of Sana'a, the coastline of the Red Sea, and they have been battling for independence for a very long time. I mean, it's even come up in debates. Like, I remember thinking about this back when Bernie Sanders was talking about USA providing weapons to Saudi Arabia and support of the Yemeni people. That's when this started to come up for me, to be honest. And I just think that I mean, I don't see the Houthis sending a faction or a group of Yemeni out there in Gaza or in Israel, but I see it as mostly symbolic, where countries who want to have their independence, who have been fighting for their independence for a very long time, such as the Yemenis have, that's the solidarity that they provide. Whether both of you agree with that, that's the way I see it. I don't think they will go out there. If you look at Yemen and Gaza, even if it's closer, right? It's like quite far away from where they are for them to be extracting or to be sharing those resources that they really need for themselves, because it is a poor country, as you said, Kenny.
I just wanted to say that so there is a war going on between Yemen and Israel, like, because we've talked about economic war as being like embargo as being an act of war in the past, and they in effect have an embargo on Israel. And the geography is actually playing in their favor, because Israel would have to fly all the way through Saudi Arabia, navigate down the Red Sea, in order to do any damage to Yemen, or do pretend to do anything like they're doing to the Palestinian people. And so, I mean, I think that Germany are being very strategic, and I think this was their moment, in asserting some sort of control of that very important point in the global economy.
Yeah, and I think I think that it is the Houthis' willingness to do this is an indication of the weakness, of the perceived weakness of U.S. empire, an empire that has been able to whenever it sends its carriers anywhere, everything shuts down, everyone backs off. That's not happening here, and in fact, when the U.S. shot, like with its helicopters recently, blew up a few Houthi vessels, killed 10 Houthis, and the Houthi has said, "You're going to pay for that. Like, we're going to make you pay." So they're planning, and that's when they did the unmanned surface vessel, just to show that they weren't done. So I do think it's very significant what they're doing. I also believe that this is largely something that the Houthis understand or believe, that the future in the Middle East is not the United States. It's Iran and China, and Russia. And I think they're that's the side that they hope to gain, come to prominence with. And so I think that, and it's interesting. I did read a little bit about their religion, which is a Shia religion, which, yes, the Yemen has a Sunni majority. 75% of the people in Yemen are Sunni, and only 25% would identify as Shia. But the type of Shia is called Zaidi Shia, which is a little different, which is different than the Shia that's in Iran. And even the Houthis have even said that they don't really seek to rule all of Yemen, because they don't think they can, in terms of, like, it wouldn't even be fair. But one of the interesting elements of their religion, and it's part of their religion, is it actually has, it's a religion which actually historically says that you have a duty to fight corrupt rulers, which, that's very interesting to me, that there be a religion that actually, like, that's a feature of the religion. It was well before and the name Houthi comes from the family Al-Houthi, which was very prominent and well known, and one of them got killed during the civil war in that country. So I think they're called Ansar Allah, Partisans of God. Also, so Houthi and Ansar Allah is the same thing, but their type of religion is Zaidi Shia. So it's interesting to me that in their belief system, it would say we fight corruption, we fight. We actually do fight injustice at one level, kind of. So I think that can feature into it, but by and large, I tend to think that what we are seeing are the actions of proxies, and the Houthis are, I believe, really acting as proxies for Iran and China and Russia in this region. That doesn't dismiss it, doesn't discount it. It just means that I don't ultimately believe that they're the dog that's being sent to hunt, but the hunter is going to eat the bird, and the hunter is Iran and China and Russia. And I just think that all these battles, to me, happening across the globe are largely going to be proxy battles, because everything's being redivided up. And I know people think that the multipolar world is going to be a more peaceful world. It won't. It's going to be a world of proxies, where each of these poles is jockeying for position until one can push the other one, off the cliff. And again, that's just speculation on my part, but that's how I look at this.
I think that's a very, like, once you pan out, and see the sequence of events, right? Like, first Hamas, now Yemen, and like the logistical support, and the financial support that they need to do some of the actions they've taken. to me, it is evidence that they are proxies, but it doesn't mean the proxies don't have like any agency, right? Like, is that their cause aligns, or at least the people who are moving the pieces use their cause, in order to get what they want, right? Like the movers and shakers of the world, and so, but when we get caught up, right, on like just the righteous, the right of the Hamas and the Palestinians to fight back, we forget that there is a bigger game being played here, and that all these causes are just part of the global chessboard.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And also that when people were worried that Gaza, when Israel went and attacked Gaza, it was going to become a regional war. It is becoming a regional war. This is evidence of this, and it doesn't look to me. The U.S. actually moved like one of its carrier groups, the USS Ford, out, but I think that was in the Mediterranean. They're keeping their ships in the Red Sea, as far as I know, and in fact, they're trying to draw more of Europe into the Red Sea, and so those are going to be targets there. And I don't see the Houthis backing down anytime soon, because I do think that the neoconservatives that people are talking about, the John Boltons who are saying we got to go after Iran and things like that. I think there's a logic there, because they know that unless they start going after the people behind the people, that they're going to just get harassed, and the U.S. is going to find itself. Look, the U.S. made a proxy of Ukraine to bleed Russia. Well, now Iran is bleeding the United States, and that's what this is going to do. I don't think it's going to bleed it in terms of troops, but it will bleed it in terms of money and resources, because these are very cheap attack weapons that are being used to threaten U.S. stuff, and in order to block them, they have to throw up a lot of expensive missiles up into the air, so it's going to cost the United States a lot, and I think Iran knows that. I think China knows that. I think Russia knows that, and I think all those players are involved in the things that are going on here.
There's also like underwater drones, so there's like they can just send a swarm of drones to overwhelm the systems, and all they need is like one or two, and like to make damage to a billion-dollar, multiple billions of dollars ships, right? Like a U.S. carrier, and so yeah, the cost is significant, and it might be very unpopular here too, right? Like when you see the results that won't be there really, and so
yeah. Like, and one thing that the guy Colonel Douglas McGregor talks about, the aircraft carrier was a major feature of the World War II, but he thinks those things are done now. He thinks that as in terms of being militarily important, because of hypersonic missiles, because of drone technology, because of space war, essentially, he thinks the aircraft carrier is basically a weapon of the bygone era that looks big, but it is a very expensive piece of steel that's going to end up in the bottom of the sea.
That's what Ukraine shown, I think, in the mastery of Russians, in using this technology that you're talking about, that's cheaply made, because for every, I guess, dollar spent, like Russia gets a lot more bang for their buck than the U.S. Where there is a lot of people making money here, but what costs,
I think some people who understand that the U.S. and what Israel is doing in Gaza is wrong. Some of the folks are excited about what the Houthis are doing, and at one level, I do think it's David versus Goliath. But ultimately, I still believe that what we're really watching is a widening global war, and it's just spreading over larger and larger sections of the globe. And that is not an exciting thing, because I think that inevitably leads to like much bigger conflagration, a much bigger war, World War III.
Wasn't there an Israeli strike in Lebanon recently?
Right, and then that's
also in Iran, right?
two things. I mean, there was a terror attack on the the anniversary of Qasem Soleimani, the dude who Trump blew up, the Iranian general that Trump was responsible for going after. This is the 4th year anniversary of his passing, and there were a terror attack there. People are wondering where that came from, and like, I think it could be Israel. It could, and a prominent leader of the Hamas was blown up in Beirut, killed in Beirut, and that, again, these are all seen as provocations, and many people think that Israel's goal is to draw the United States into a regional war and draw it into a war against Iran. So these things are happening.
And Western media is reporting that ISIS is claiming the attack in Iran, which is very,
It's possible because the U.S. supported, like, I don't know the difference, but in attacking the Houthis, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia supported Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So, like, the U.S. has found itself at different times, and Israel has found itself at different times finding its own, extremist proxy to push its agenda. So I think it's entirely possible that a group like that was set in motion. But again, like, that's how these folks are playing it. They're all finding their little tools to jab at each other. So I think it's entirely possible it could have been that group, but I believe that group could very much be backed by Israel and by the United States. They did it in Syria and they did it in Yemen.
I don't have much to add. I don't have much to add. I'm not sure if we should find a place to conclude. I was thinking of what you said, Andy, though. A lot of talk, very little show of, I'll just support, right, for Palestine. I think of, as I'm looking at Kenny, sorry, I think of Guatemala. I think of Guatemala. They condemned the attacks on Israel, and they're not going to cut their ties with Israel. And I think of my country, Mexico's trying to play both sides, trying to be a neutral country, and at the same time not wanting to halt the exports of security surveillance and the diplomatic ties they have with Israel, which we have talked about, Pegasus, the spy surveillance program here, here in Colombia, in Mexico. And then I think of, the other countries as well, like, El Salvador, which Bukele has Palestinian roots he has those Palestinian roots, but he's definitely backing Israel. I think it was Chile that was recalling their ambassadors. But yeah, it is a David and Goliath kind of situation. And I don't know the reasons why they will show, and we speculated on why they would show or why would they do this now, or why would they are right there at the very entrance of that port. So we'll see. I don't have much to add. Did you want to say something, Andy Orkin?
All just interesting as you bring up a lot of these things in Latin America. The Houthis actually were quite outspoken. I don't know if they did anything beyond that of being against the U.S. actions in Venezuela to take out Maduro. So that's interesting to me. Like, the Houthis, they had demonstrations in Yemen, supporting Maduro and opposing what's the name of that dude?
Opposing Guaido.
Yeah, Guaido being
Guaido.
Guaido, so that's very interesting that's the position they took.
And actually, like, depending on what continues to happen, I'm glad that you brought up Latin America. I wonder, like, Latin America has been relatively peaceful in terms of these global dynamics, but it makes me think, actually, Venezuela, watch out, because as like that area of the Middle East gets more tense, Venezuela has the biggest untapped oil reserves in the world, and it's like right there from Miami, And so I will say, Venezuela, watch out.
Mm-hmm.
And not just Venezuela, because Brazil also has discovered some reserves themselves, in mining, and we know that the Russians have they're a significant force in terms of mining in the world, right? And I know that the Canadians have a lot of their hands in Latin America. They're the biggest miners in the fucking world. And so as the world starts to get split up, because people keep thinking that the economic ties, right, like this neoliberal idea that globalization will bring peace. I think these things are rupturing, and they're more and more evident. And so, you know, the fuckers, sorry, the people pushing for their green fucking revolution, they're gonna look at other sources, less challengeable, if that's the word, resources. And the U.S. thinks of Latin America as its backyard. So I don't think it's gonna be left out of these conflicts, proxy, because they have to find alternatives. And so I'll keep an eye on Latin America and Africa.
And it's and I can't speak to Africa, because I'm here in Colombia, but it's interesting. It's not unanimous. They have very distinct, like Argentina is supportive of Israel, and Brazil wants to be on both sides, wants to try to do what Mexico's doing, be the neutral, and then Colombia just said, we don't support genocide, and Petro said it. We don't support genocide, and then that made Israel's response be like, we're going to stop halting these security exports to Colombia for saying something like that. And then, Honduras recalled their ambassador, and Chile recalled their ambassador, Colombia recalled their ambassador, and Bolivia cut altogether diplomatic ties. So I don't know where Latin America will stand, because it's so different now that you think of it. As you say, we should keep an eye on Latin America. Where are they going to be positioning themselves? I don't know. It's not unanimous as I had thought.
Well, I think what happens with BRICS and Brazil is going to feature large in that.
Yeah.
And one other thing, just to be clear, because I know some people may disagree about me saying that the Houthis are a proxy for Iran and ultimately China. I don't know, but that's my take on it. But that does not mean that I am against what the Houthis are doing. As a person in the United States who knows my government has to be taken down, I support any power which defeats the U.S. Army anywhere, because the thing that's going to be necessary for part of what's going to have to happen for a revolution to happen in this country is our armies are going to have to be defeated across the globe, and that will create the possibility or another opening for taking our own government down, our institutions down. And so any defeat of the U.S. empire anywhere helps those of us who are fighting for revolution in this country, and that's so that I just want to be clear that that's where I fall on this.
And again, just to quote again Scott Ritter, because I agree with him in this, and I think you all would agree that the U.S. is an empire in decline. They haven't gone away. They're still a powerful fucking empire nation. They still have tentacles, massive ability to do destruction. And again, history, shows us that empires, and I've said this over and over, die a violent death. And so they're not just gonna succumb, to the back. So I'll be keeping an eye on what happens next, right? And how that unleashes a chain of events that I think has the possibility for ultimately the use of destructive forces, because I don't even think like it's just nuclear weapons, which I do think is anymore. But it says seeing Ukraine, like what's happened there, in the cost of human life, seeing the Gaza, and it's kind of a preview of these proxies that again, I cite back the Cold War. The Cold War was a violent period. It wasn't. It's made to be like the way it's addressed in history, at least here in America, is that it was a moment of tension. A lot of fucking people died during that period. A lot of destruction happened, during that tension and wrestling. And with more technology, more destruction, and so yeah. So I think it gives me reason for pause, because you don't know. Again, like I expressed to you, this whole Latin American thing. I don't think we're as safe. Our people are as safe because they're not in the Middle East. Because I think there's a scramble going on, and also people are having to choose sides or put chips wherever, and ultimately violence is what underwrites the system. It's not a position of a politician. I don't see the world that way, or a symbolic gesture is the ability to wield violence. The Houthis are showing it, and so we'll see what happens.
All right. Okay. Is this a good place to end? To conclude? Yeah. Well, okay. Well, thank you both. Kenny, great to see you again.
Mm-hmm.
Last week, I thought we were going to be here, the two of us, but I'm very glad you're here, Kenny. It was, especially with this topic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast that's channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests in the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast /channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on the Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Google Play, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, Telegram. And you can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. And if you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts Kenny Cepeda and Andy Lipson. Thank you very much for joining us. And one last thing I want to say is we have now the Spanish language podcast that we'll have in Que Queda de la Izquierda, What's Left in Spanish, which we'll be recording soon for our audience who want to have a Spanish language content, similar content, but different people, and also challenging conversations, which Kenny is going to be on there as well as an invited guest constantly, whenever he can, of course, when he's relieved of daddy duties. So we'll be having that this year. All right. Okay. Thank you all for listening. Ciao, ciao.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.